and welcome to another session on women's writing. We have completed feminist novelist and we are now to begin poetry section. So let's first start with Emily Dickinson's poem, She Rose to His Requirement. Now I want you to just have a look at the title. If you look at the title, you would find his, the word his is written in capital letter. H is written in capital letter. So I just want you to put that in mind, okay? Just bear that in mind and we'll pick it up later. Another thing that before we begin, let's have a quick understanding of Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson was a great poet of American literature, and she was a poet who was obsessed by death. If you remember another poet who was obsessed by death, it would be Sylvia Plath, right? So here also you find, but Sylvia Plath, she took her own life, but Emily Dickinson on the other hand, she died due to Bright's disease. Now, Emily Dickinson was also a poet who was greatly obsessed by death. She was born in Amherst, Massachusetts, on December 10th, 1830. She lived a secluded life. But she was energetic and she was an outgoing woman, but it all changed when she started attending the Amherst Academy and then Holyoke Female Seminary. Now she lived there until her death she died on 15th, 1886. She died due to Bright's disease. She began to grow in the seminary or in the female seminary. She began to grow very reclusive, especially during her mid-20s. She attended exclusively to household chores and also to writing poetry. However, only few were published while she was alive. Little is known of Dickinson's life. That's the ironic thing here. Most of what is known about her is from people who knew her. She was also nicknamed as the Nun of Amherst. She is noted for her eloquent and concise and also deceptively simple verses. They look very simple, but they are deceptively simple, apparently simple. They have a very deep meaning in it. And not just that, she has used at certain times she economizes words, and also she is not very keen about her grammar and also her punctuations. It's not because that she was not literate, she purposefully chose not to. So perhaps it was a kind of modern kind of writing that she wanted to bring in, and also this style of writing itself, capitalizing or sometimes she would use capitals, sometimes she would just economize words. Grammar would be, sometimes there wouldn't be any grammar in it. But she did this purposefully because it was like something from an outpour from her heart, outpour of her involuntary thoughts. Now, her life was dedicated to a secret and self-imposed assignment, and that was the mission of writing a letter to the world. Okay, and this letter, this understanding, this life, this psychology of life, and also this theme itself was expressed in most of her poems. Not even the closest to her knew fully the depth and extent of her emotions. She was rather a very complex person. Nearly 1,800 poems, 1,800 poems was tied neatly in packets, and these poems were found only after her death. And these poems revealed an immensely complex and passionate sensibility of the poet. With the publication of the poems of Emily Dickinson in 1955, the shy, reclusive poet came to be regarded with Whitman and Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, as one of the greatest lyric poets. The main theme of Emily Dickinson's poetry is death, with which immortality is intimately associated. Her poems also include friends, nature, love, and death. Many of her poems allusions come from her education in the Bible, also her understanding of the classical mythology, and also her vast reading of Shakespeare. Dickinson did not give titles to some of her poems. It is the others who published her poems who gave titles to her poems, which are usually the first line of the poem. And she wrote short lines, and they were mostly limited to 6 stanzas. If we look at She Rose to His Requirement also, this poem is a very concise or short poem, and you have only in fact 3 stanzas in it. So the rhythm also, the next thing is the rhythm. The rhythm that she used was common meter or ballad meter. I have taught you what common meter and ballad meter is. It is there in literary criticism, the concepts and forms. In literary forms, I have already explained ballads. So ballad meter, it consists of a quatrain. It's also called common meter or ballad meter. It consists of a quatrain. Quatrain means 4 lines, and in this 4 lines you have the first line and the third line, and they have 4 iambic feet. Okay, 4 iambic feet. If you count unstressed, stressed makes 1 iamb. Then again unstressed, stressed makes another iamb, 2. Unstressed, stressed, the third iamb. Again unstressed, stressed makes the 4th iamb. So it is 4 iambs in which line? The first and the third line, and in the second and the 4th line you will have 3 iambic feet. Unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. Alright, you have studied what iambs are. I don't have to teach you that. Okay, so her poems contain images and themes that are still relevant in today's world. The use of images help readers visualize her theme. In this poem, She Rose to His Requirement, Dickinson depicts the image of a young woman's potential being denied. This was a common attitude during the period she lived. In England, we studied that period. In England, it was the Victorian period, where women were subjugated, they were suppressed and oppressed. And the US, this was the atmosphere, or this atmosphere was no less different. Women or females were considered inferior, weak, fragile, those who needed to be taken care of by a man, either her father or her husband. She is denied all her freedom and is confined to the 4 walls of the house. She is the sole property of her husband, who can mistreat her, throw her away, or even kill her. In the poem, we have She Rose to His Requirement. It's all about child marriage. The theme is child marriage, and how women are, mistreated, and how their life, or how a young woman's potential is denied. As a child, she's married, all her dreams, all her potential goes unknown. She's denied all these. And she is married. She's about to be married. When we start the poem, this young woman is about to be married, and in that process drop all her personal characteristics. She has to change from what she was to a new her, to another woman. She has to rise from a child to that of an adult. And remember, this is happening, or this was when child marriages were prevalent during those times. Even now it is prevalent. Even now it exists, even to this very day, the 21st century. It's shocking. Okay, so now this child marriage system itself has been a common thought. Now the theme is not completely child marriage. It's about how, of course, child marriage, at the same time marriages can completely or mar her potential, and how she is subjugated and she is suppressed by the patriarchal norms, which demands her to be a good mother, a good wife, and she has to rise to the requirements of her husband. Since we already studied feminist novelists, it would be easier for you to connect the poem with the ones that we studied earlier. So women were to rise to all the requirements of what her man demands her of. Yes, it is also about child marriage. So I just wanted to discuss, before we move on, just want to discuss with you on this particular topic, child marriage. This child marriage or child marriages have been common throughout the history, and it is prevalent even today, especially in developing countries like Africa, South Asia, Latin America. Now, I recently read an article where a woman from Kenya, she had written about or written a report on what she witnessed, or a small child being charged to 5 years of, she has been sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment, and also she has to pay a fine to her husband's family. Now, what the reason is, she killed her husband who tried to rape her. Now, she was she was to be married. She was given in marriage at the age of 10, but fearing all this, 10 or 12, but fearing this, it was a forced marriage, and fearing this, the child runs away and is not known. This is a real story, okay? Child runs away and is not known for several years, and later at the age of 15, the child later returns back, and upon knowing that the child returned back to her home, these people, they go to her house, and they bring her forcefully to the bridegroom's or to the groom's house, and that night he forces himself on her with the help of his 3 cousins. The 3 cousins pinned her down to the bed, and when he forced himself upon her, she could not bear it any longer, and what she did was she took the knife and stabbed this man. So when I read this story, when I was just going through the story, I was like wondering why, the harsh reality or the brutality of life, we must also understand how old the child is. She's hardly 15 years old. She's a child. Okay, we have such instances, several instances happening in the northern parts of India as well. So that's one thing that I wanted to discuss before we move on. So even this phrase, this child bride, if you look at the word, it's child bride. The phrase is the ones who are married earlier. It's a phrase, you will find that in the Oxford Dictionary, which came into being during the 18th century or so. 18th, 17th century or so. This word, child bride, it is very notable because look at the word child bride. It binds together two nouns, child and bride, and these two nouns appear very incompatible. And it neatly conveys a sort of discomfort and disbelief rather than bringing any sort of feeling of romance. A bride is, when you say the word bride, it brings in romance and love. A shy bride, it brings the picture of a shy bride to our mind. But when we use the phrase child bride, it suddenly loses this charm, and there's a lot of discomfort and kind of harsh or brutal side of life is portrayed there. Child bride, which these two nouns which look very incompatible. Children who marry at a very early age. So if you ask your grandparents, your great grandparents or your grandparents, of course not your mothers, they belong to this the 20th century, so they wouldn't be, it's hard, there would rarely be a few who would have been married off at a very young age, because we have our rules and we have government restrictions and rules and regulations. But if you ask your grandparents or about your great grandparents, they would tell you that they normally got married at the age of 15. It was something that was prevalent during those times. Children who marry at this very young age, say 10, 12 or 15, mostly 14 and 15, they sacrifice their childhood, and what happens is this whole system of child marriage is making a mockery of our understanding of what a marriage is. A marriage is a union of soul. It is very peaceful, whereas the harsh reality proves that marriage in reality is not so. Marriage in reality, it's all about fight for dowry, it's all about fight for power and the unwanted patriarchal norms that a woman has to follow. The same is true about boy husband also. There are boys who are also forced to get married at a very young age. But since the poem here introduces us to a child bride, perhaps we can assume that this child or the woman introduced in the poem should be that of should be getting married to. She's a young bride or a child bride, not a young bride, a child bride, perhaps going to be married to a man elder to her. Okay, so this phrase will also perversely expresses the legal power of the institution of marriage, which can transform a child into something adult-like, a bride. Now I want you to bear that in mind. It transforms a child into something adult-like, a bride, a child bride. Okay, this has a lot to do with our poem. Often they marry, or they are forced to marry at the age of 11, 12 or 14 or 15. And this is a time when they should be playing with their toys. is a time when she should be running out in her house, chasing the butterflies and feeling the freedom, feeling the love of her parents, an innocent love. It is disastrous, even terrifying. But the truth is that it exists even in this 21st century. Right? I told you of one instance that happened in Africa. Today, many such cases are due to the religious norms. Earlier also it was like that, and it is done without the consent of the government. And also poverty is another villain in this heinous crime. I would call it a heinous crime. They are too young for what marriage requires of them, right? They're very young. What do they know about what marriage is? Marriage means a huge responsibility. According to me, what according to you? No, when we sit for a discussion, I would like to hear from you what your concept or your idea of the perfect age to get married. Okay, I want all of you to answer it. Either you can answer it in the comment section, or you can answer it in when we take up this topic for our discussion. So I want you to answer me this question. What is the right age? What according to you is the right age to get married? Both boys and girls must answer. Okay. So 15, 14 and all is definitely too young for what marriage requires of them. And this practice is mostly found in the rural areas, and the urban areas it is not there, or they consider it, or this teenage marriage and all, they consider it as a relic of the past. So it mostly exists in these rural areas. Okay, so let's get back to our poem. She rose to his requirement. Let's begin the poem. She rose to his requirement. Look at the word his. H is in capital letter. When do we usually, or when do we normally use H capital when you say he or his? Normally it is when we address it to, or when we usually speak as a reference to God, right? So perhaps the poet implies that the society has created a situation where a wife should consider her husband as God. In Indian society also, this is what we follow. You may have seen the Tamil movies where women normally touch the feet of a husband when they get up, where they touch the feet of their husband and they take blessing and then move to do their household chores. So here that itself is considered as a kind of norm that the society has created. Now, who created this? The society has created this patriarchal norm where women should consider their husbands as God. So that's why perhaps the title you have, she rose to his requirement. She and R and H and the requirement is all in capital, but his, the word his is particularly in capital. To and his, there to is a preposition, and his could have been in small letters, but his here is in capital letter, where it is perhaps purposefully done. Now, some of them were, the titles were given by her, some of them were published by Emily Dickinson, but not all her poems. In other poems, like most of her other poems were published by others, and these titles were also given by the ones who were learned, or maybe her publishers perhaps would have given these titles. Especially the first line is the one that is being taken as the title. So here whoever gave this title has given H as capital because it matches the theme of the poem. The theme of the poem is where how a woman should look upon her husband, or how she should consider her husband. She should consider her husband as something very important, something who's very important, something who's very superior, somewhat similar to God. So that his in capital matches and suits the theme of the poem. She rose to his requirement, dropped the playthings of her life to take the honorable work of woman and of wife. If aught she missed in her new day of amplitude or awe, or first prospective or the gold, in using wore away, it lay unmentioned as the sea develops pearl and weed, but only to himself is known the fathoms they abide. So see how the poem is very short, it looks very simple. As I told you earlier, it is only deceptively simple. Another thing, look at the way she has written the poem. She has economized words. They are very short, and grammar, if you look at the grammar, it looks as though it is just, she has written points, few concise points, right? Instead of giving long structured sentences. But she has done that purposefully. She was kind of breaking away from the norms of writing poetry, the conventional style of poetry. She was bringing in or dawning a new style of poetry, of poem. So she rose to his requirement, dropped the playthings of her life to take the honorable work of woman and of wife. So the poem begins with the woman getting married and entering a new life. The first line onwards, and from the first line onwards, the poet focuses her attention of such a woman. A woman, what kind of woman? A woman who is forced to marry at a very early age. A child marriage, a child bride. So again, a child bride perhaps, that's the right word. To take the honorable work, she has dropped the playthings of her life. So in entering her married life, the girl, she has to leave all her playthings, for she is no more a child, but she's going to be a bride. Right? So there is a transformation. A transformation marriage brings in, or this institution, this power of the institution of marriage, it brings in a transformation. It transforms the small child into something adult-like, a bride. And therefore she has to lose all her playthings, whatever playthings she had. It is not just literally, it also means, it is also symbol in the sense, all her playthings, all her innocence, all her creativity, all her potential, everything is a part of this plaything. So it's not just the playthings as of toys alone, but also all her freedom, or her innocent joy of seeing a butterfly flutter from flower to flower, picking nectar. Her innocent joy in seeing the first drop of rain. Her running around, her screaming, her playings, all this is or has to be dropped. Her innocent nap, when she feels tired, she would perhaps lie on her mother's lap and go to sleep. And she perhaps would like her mother to stroke her hair gently and pat her to sleep. Perhaps she loved or loves to hear stories before she goes to bed. All that has to be dropped. All that is not going to be, or she has to outlive or she has to grow up, and she has to become a bride. And she is mocking. So Emily Dickinson, if you look at the third line, to take the honorable work, now look at the way she is written, honorable work. So she's mocking at the patriarchal society. The poet is unhappy about the women's situation and she being defined by a woman is defined by the shallow lens of marriage. So she calls it an honorable work. She mockingly calls it an honorable work. So here Emily Dickinson is trying to oppose the perception that a woman's individuality has no value. So she has to drop all her playthings, her innocence is lost, and she has to take upon, or she is transformed from a child to an adult, a bride. For what? To take up a very important position, and that position is that of a woman and of a wife. An adult, a woman here is a reference to a transformation from a child to an adult, from an adult to a bride. And what is her responsibility? Her responsibility is to take care of her husband, rise to his requirements, whatever it be. So the poet is mocking at this patriarchal society. How the society views her through the shallow lens of marriage and denies all her individuality, her value. So we'll stop here and we'll pick up the next two stanzas, or we'll begin the next two stanzas in the next video. So till then, thank you and keep safe.